good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are. I am your host, Dr. Michael Connor for Voices for Excellence, and also the CEO and founder of Agile Evolutionary Group. And welcome again to season 2. This has just been an absolute joy and a very, very intriguing journey, speaking with a plethora of educators. But for this guest, I want to add in rule breakers and change maker, right? My guest today is a personal friend. I tell you, we met at the Tech and Learning Summit up in Massachusetts, and we just clicked. And you know how a geek I am. I just started to geek out, and Jed was absolutely there geeking out with me to the point where we were actually doing an activity and we completely forgot to do the activity, and we were just
I don't know if we forget. I think we bailed. Come on.
I'm going to say this, right? We forgot,
Okay.
right? I'll put it up there. We forgot, but the conversations that we were having in Boston just led to this personal friendship where now, you know, he's an author, he's a blogger, he has done immense work around innovation, digital technology. Most recently, congratulations. Jed is the director of digital learning and innovation for Nashoba Regional School District in the Boston area, consisting of 3 different districts. But more importantly, Jed's book, which I was featured in, I don't know why he would do that.
Yes, you do.
This book right here, Impact to Influence, I can't put down, right? Because when I first read it initially, the people that he highlighted, different from, I would say different verticals within the ecosystem, but all the same story around this need for where we have to have, I like to say, a level of impact to influence change in education. So without further ado, it is my honor, my guest to have Jed Stefanowicz.
You got it. Perfect.
Yes, I got it. Yes. Or everybody knows I always chop up everybody's last name, Jed. But Jed, welcome to Voices for Excellence, my friend. How are you? First of all, congratulations, my friend.
Yes, thank you very much. And you did a perfect job rhyming it with Bananowitz. So that's the trick. That's the trick. It's super exciting to be here. Super excited. Just to talk to you. I mean, we're as close to in person as we're going to get for a while, but this is, it's great to see you. It's great to connect. It's also been really cool. You know, we both kind of were working on projects and they both came out at similar times, and it's been really fun just to see how that project goes. And you reminded me of us, forgetting the activity we were doing at that summit. It was a goofy activity, and we got into like an instant, really cool conversation. And we both were like, this is too good of a conversation to do this scavenger hunt that so we directed ourselves. Rick Rubin would tell you, distraction is not procrastination. So that's a book I'm reading right now. But it was so cool to just, you know, connect and start talking and realizing. And it was just really cool. And I had the pleasure to immediately know that I wanted to latch on. I wanted to be in business with Dr. Michael Connor. I mean, that's really, anyone who listens to this knows that when you talk to you learn something, but you also feel this like motivation. Your energy is infectious and contagious. And I was like, oh my God. It was funny because I started describing to you this book project. And first you gave me the look like, ooh, that's a good idea. And then there was this pause where I was like, ooh, is it too soon to ask him to be in the book? And you're like, I'm waiting for you to ask me that. And you're the perfect addition to this book, because that book, Impact Influence, hey, look, I've got the same one too.
Absolutely, brother.
You're right. It's people who may not be some of the traditional keynotes, may not be some of the traditional loudmouths or, you know, spotlight, because they're people who, some of whom are still in the classroom. Some have taken non-traditional routes toward leadership. And really, in all the stories, though, part of what I really was looking to find was, what are those true lines where we've all gone from impacting 20 kids at a time in our classrooms to now influencing, whether it's local, state, national policy, whether it's becoming an author, a podcaster. There's Teachers of the Year in there. And then I think the thing that caught you was the structure of the book. It's a profile of each person. And then there's a 20-30-minute Zoom interview just like this between the two of us. And there's a QR code that goes to that recording in the book. And there's so many podcasts out there, yourself included, doing it way better than I ever could. So I didn't want to do a podcast, but what I did want to do was capture these stories in people's own voice. And because nothing replaces that. And then it was really interesting to get people talking about their stories. Sometimes they would lapse into their stage stories and they'd lapse into their familiar whatever, and not patter, but you talk about the same thing a lot. And I would gladly interrupt them and say, I know that about you already. I want to know, back it up. Who was it along the way who tapped you? Who was it along the way when you were discouraged? What are those situations, and what is it about you, not about your accomplishments, that wanted to, frame yourself as a risk taker, a rule breaker, a change maker? And how do you do it? Because what I realized by the end of the book, honestly, because we haven't talked about this, was, for me, it was really a selfish collection and connection of all these people whom I admire and I respect and I've learned from. And I kind of wanted to get them together, and we're putting together an event. It probably won't be till the spring. It's, a 2-year late book launch, but I want to get a way to get all these people together because I feel like they got to know each other a little bit in the book.
Yeah.
I want you to talk to them. I want them to talk to you. I mean, it's a cool collection and connection of people. And that's what that project was all about. So thank you officially, formally for being in the book. It was my honor to have you in it.
Oh, man. No, Jed, I'll tell you this. And to my audience right here, right? Page 41. Look at me right here, right? Just pointed to the man, Jed, because when Jed was highlighting and explaining his book project, I said, man, I was like, that is the coolest thing I've heard. And I was like, you really going to put this together? He's like, yeah, we're going to set up a 20-minute interview. I'm going to interview you. And this was the outcome of all those rule breakers and change makers alike. So, Jed, is absolutely an honor. Thank you for the kind words, my friend. It's just good to see you. So now getting into this, right? Because what people don't know about you is how you are, in my opinion, one of the experts when it comes to digital learning, when it comes to technology, when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to innovation or reimagination of the model. So, for us, this is just a normal conversation, but I want my audience to be able to depict and unwrap the specific strategies and the techniques and the tactics with regards to, I think that this is going to be an arduous lever, this theory around integrating digital learning, or what digital learning looks like in the AC stage of education. But before we actually go in the depth with your book, or go in the depth and breadth in the context of what that looks like from the education ecosystem, I want to ask you this fun question, right? And Jed, you are a fun individual, but when education leaders, advocates, technology experts, digital transformers, district stakeholders, and even the teachers that you work with, when they first encounter with you, Jed, what song comes to mind that describes your equity and innovation stance in the AC stage of education?
That is a really fun question. And I like a fun question, because my last question to you was one of those kind of challenging questions too. So here we are. It's mid-August. We're getting ready for the school year, and we all know what that's like. So my first instinct is going to be wake me up when September ends, because
that is a classic.
We know what September brings, and it's not the good stuff. It's all the, can you help connect my document camera, and all the subscriptions and all the sign-ons, but that's important because you need it. You need all of it. And I'm not going to be able to give you a lot of the answers to those biggest questions for 2023 or 2030, because we don't know the questions that we have yet to answer, right? But what we do know is who's in those classrooms right now, the grown-ups and the short people too. Who are the people who are going to be impacted by the change, Who are the people going to be delivering the change? So my other song is going to be Bill Withers' Use Me. Not just because it's a cool group, but I mean, we all groove on one, right?
Absolutely.
But, so Use Me, because so I taught third grade for 22 years. I've been a digital learning coach 6 years after that. And now I'm just stepping into my first admin role. And you've sat in every seat, so you're gonna have to give me some advice.
Absolutely.
But it's really an interesting one. But I view my role as a director of digital learning and innovation as kind of a district level digital learning coach, truly at the same time, because it's working with teachers who have been there for 30 years, and it's working with teachers who are landing in those classrooms for the first time. And it's, yes, it is the person who says, I don't remember where to plug in my document camera, but it's also the person who says, I want to use ChatGPT. And it's the person who says, I want to rethink the way we're publishing, and I want to get a blog going, and I want to get a podcast going. So it's really hearing all those things. And it's not about my initiatives. It's about enabling their initiatives to come to life. So a combination of those two songs, I think, hopefully I'll be there to help them wake up when September ends, but I want them to use me. I want them to come to me because truly, the administrator role is in service of everyone around.
Only you, Jed, can, and I want to be technical with this to be funny. Only you can create a causality alignment between Wake Me Up When September Ends and Use Me by Bill Withers. But yes, that is awesome, because it is so funny, because when September rolls around, right? Wake Me Up When September Ends, that's when all of the new transitions and teachers, especially now with you, teachers, leaders coming in to be able to support, implement at that basic foundational level of technology. You are going to have the continuum of questions, whether it be from the basic levels of what you said, initial setup, to how do I create blogs and podcasts so that we can use this as an asynchronous platform for students to learn, right? So you are going to have that wide spectrum of the learning model, adult learning model, I say, for our teachers and our leaders, but more importantly, Use Me. I love how you put that in context where, yes, you are an expert. Yes, you have the foundational core knowledge of making that transition. But more importantly, what you said is so critical, right? You're here to help the teachers. You're here to help the leaders as they embark upon this implementation, this holistic implementation of technology in their classrooms, in the schools. And Jed, I tell you this, I wish you were around when I was a superintendent, man, to have a director of digital learning and innovation, because now we're going to get into that point. It's so critical now in the AC stage of education. We were talking about this, before the BC stage of education, right?
Yeah.
But now I want to highlight one of your books, right? Not Impact and Influence. We're going to get there, okay? But one of your books, I think it's a top 100 seller, if I'm correct. It's Taking Aim at Digital Learning. There it is, right there.
Let me blur it out. Take Aim at Digital Learning. I like to tell people it's a million seller. That's only because I got a million of them in my seller.
But Jed, here's the thing. When you wrote the book, Jed, right? I'm going to call you Nostradamus, because you were predicting the future. When did you release that book, Jed?
I released that book the beginning of the same year I released the other book. I know, 2022. Yeah.
Before it's time, right?
Sure. I like the way you put that.
Before it's time, because Jed, everything that we're trying to incorporate and implement now, right, to make this strategic or intentional shift within the educational model, the core tenets and the subsystems within the model, you have found ways to be able to integrate strategies as well as methodologies to be able to support this shift, right? So just really fast, if you can just give a high-level overview of Take Aim at Digital Learning and some of the core underpinnings that, let's hypothetically say, all my listeners and all my viewers, they purchased this book. What are the key points that they're going to take out of that?
Sure. Well, I hope they do, because it's on Amazon. It's at X Factor online. in your grocer's freezer, I'm sure. The book, it's interesting that you say it's ahead of its time, because I felt like to some degree, yeah, I'm hoping it's ahead of its time, but it also feels way behind its time. And maybe for some people, it's right on time, because we have been poised, right? We've been poised for this revolution, and where's it been? If it was really going to happen, it would have happened at the stroke of COVID, and the technology integration would have been seamless. And in fact, we saw the opposite. But the book is called Take Aim at Digital Learning, and the AIM stands for Activate, Innovate, Motivate. And it's really meant to be a handbook for teachers, for coaches, for administrators, for leaders. It's written in a very comfortable language, almost like a collection of blog posts in short installments. But really, it's activating content, innovating instruction, motivating learners. Those ideas are not ahead of their time. Those, maybe the strategies, methodologies, and the tools might be ahead of their time, but they're always changing. And it's interesting. You were talking about my new role, Director of Digital Learning. And I have to say, I'm coming in at this directorship level, which is new for me, right? And moving into a district where there are tools I'm not familiar with. And it's a really interesting, vulnerable place for me, but I really want to model that adult learning model, really model that lead learner. Because it's not about the tool. It's never about the tool.
Right.
But there is an uncomfortable feeling about being unfamiliar with, I know this MLS, but I don't know that one. And I know that essay, and I don't know that one. So that's a really interesting thing to come in and comfortably and confidently say, I don't know. It's not about expertise in those tools in the operation. It's really about what are we trying to do and how are we trying to lift that learning. So that's what that book, Take Aim at Digital Learning, is all about. And my work is really, again, it's activating the content. And how do you do that? Through engagement. And is technology a powerful lever? Sure, it is. But it's meaningless if there isn't student buy-in, if there isn't student agency. More importantly, if there isn't teacher agency, then it's just another product. And COVID, you're the only person who I really feel has studied and then really cohesively talked about it before, during, and after. Because, man, have we seen the impact. And I don't call it learning loss, right? Learning loss is what the vendors at the conferences talk about. Right. The loss that we're seeing is that agency loss, agency of students who, some of us are blaming them for not knowing how to do school, not knowing how to wait in line, not knowing, and that's not fair. Right. But there's also the teacher agency loss too, where people have fallen out of love with their job and they came back and they were exhausted. But we also fell into what we knew how to do well. And all those innovative pockets that we always talk about, they seem to vaporize, right? And sure, people had to get back to those comfort zones. But my role as a coach, and I'm always going to call myself an educator and a coach before a director or an admin, my role, if I want to stretch people outside of their comfort zones, I need to understand that they haven't been in their comfort zones for years now. Yeah. And that's a hard truth. And you can't begin to talk about ChatGPT, AI, machine learning, that's going to radically transform education out from under people's feet if they haven't regained a sound footing after having the rugs pulled out of them from COVID. So when I look at, the purpose of writing that book was really meant to be for teachers, just, and it actually aligns, it sets up my next project. What I really want to do is give tools for how do you activate learning? How is it capturing? So let's talk about student publishing, for example. It's capturing and modeling process. Why do we publish? And one of the things I'm working on is called Beyond the Bulletin Board, and there's a section in there on that. And it's getting out of the routine of decorating our halls and walls. Yeah. For who? For our colleagues in the building? For other kids in the school to look at? It's we have to reimagine the way we've always, I know it's a cliche to say it, but the way we've always been doing it. But it's really about redesigning the structure of our instruction and then reimagining what learning looks like in the classroom. It's not about the tool we're using. It's about the types of questions we're asking. And man, AI really more effectively than anything else got us to rethink the questions we're asking. Yeah. But then more importantly, how are we sharing the answers? We don't talk about that part. We're trying to work out how are kids cheating with AI? whatever, but we're then still not answering the question of how are you accurately assessing the competencies. And, I think that's really the important thing. There's ideas in that book about how are you creating sparks and moments, right, to really engage. How are you always keeping our focus on practice over products? And that's the stuff that I'm passionate about. That's the stuff that's made me love my job and not fall out of love, and then hopefully have something to offer other teachers. So, and probably the nicest compliment I got was from a tech integration digital learning coach who kind of said, "You just wrote a manual for how to do our job." And that was a compliment for me, because that's what I wanted it to be. I didn't want it to be full of jargon. I wanted, if there's a teacher who wants to get a 101 tips to try on Monday, it's in there. If there's a teacher who wants philosophical, the difference between TPAC and SAMR and really evaluating the instruction as well as the tool, that's in there too. There's the heady, but there's really the practical and pragmatic in there as well.
Absolutely. And Jed, before we get into impact to influence, to my audience, there was a lot of concepts, a lot of strategies that Jed just provided us. And again, using this as an asynchronous platform for direct instruction, where you can be able to stop, go different parts, play Jed's answer back as he unwrapped specific components of Take Aim at Digital Learning. Because just like he received that compliment that, he provided a manual for education stakeholders to unwrap, Jed just provided classroom as well as district level strategies that can be employed right away within his answer. And Jed, absolutely correct, right? Activate, innovate, and motivate. But that core theme around engagement, we always talk about student agency, right? But teacher and student agency working in this level of parallelization interface as well is so important. And when we talk about this whole redesign and reimagination, you can take that from the classroom level all the way up to the district level as well. Amazing answer, right? Because you're absolutely correct, is that we have this deficit mindset, right? Or this negative connotation around what students lost during COVID or because of COVID, right? The cause and effect of it. I'm glad that you brought up the DC stage of education, right? Because, Jed, when we look at it, right, we had to innovate during that time, find new ways to continue the service delivery model with this egregious interruption of the pandemic, and then the novelty within the pandemic, where we had to be able to use science in order to make decisions with regards to business model and the preferred method of pedagogy, right? What we saw. Now we went back. Like when we saw now that we're in the second year of the AC stage of education, we kind of reverted back to the old practices that were embedded or is still embedded in the BC stage of education, but we're educating Generation Z and Generation Alpha. We're going to get into that much more deeper at a different segment of the podcast. Yeah, go ahead, Jed, please.
Well, speaking of egregious interruptions, I'm going to give you one right now, because part of what you just said, yeah, the DC, it was awful. No one wants to talk about it, but you know what it really did? Teaching through hybrid and being in schools, in classrooms during COVID, think of who was able to pivot. Think of who was able to rely. And, I'm not going to say they relied on the science and data, but what they relied on was 30 years of experience. It was veteran teachers. And it's not quantifiable in terms of something you can bottle up easily, but I do think you can draw the distinction between an unfair assumption that digital natives, younger, newer teachers would somehow be able to pivot better, when in fact you've got 15, 20, 30-year teachers who know that content so well that they were able to pivot, and they knew what those students needed. They just had to find the mechanisms to do it. And in that, you also had veteran teachers who were going out and finding their own PD. I mean, flipping a PD model on its head completely too, that providers who aren't, solution providers is a polite word for vendors, but those providers who haven't pivoted also, they're going to be up a creek too, because, I think educators got wise to really personalizing the experience for themselves. And I think leaders need to respond to that. I think vendors and solution providers need to reply to that too. We've been touting the need for personalization, individualization so long, and machine learning can help that process. But no one knows it better than the teacher what they need and what their students need, whether they're 5-year-olds or 15-year-olds or 25-year-olds, honestly. I mean, we're both parents and we know we made it through, but woo, there was a couple dark days in there.
Absolutely. And I can tell you this, Jed, from personal experience, right? Having a son that's a part of Gen Z, his teacher, his kindergarten teacher, I remember that she did a phenomenal job. And I always used to tell her, listen, you have 23, I believe, no, it was 22 kindergartners, especially my son who has ants in the pants, can't stay still, and was able to show progress, show growth during that time frame. Hats off to her, because I tell you, that experience, that grounded experience that she had, and providing the tools for her to be successful was the priority. Let's move into impact to influence,
Okay.
right? And we're talking about rule breakers and risk takers. High level overview, very, very abstract, but get to the level of concrete. So again, my audience could be able to purchase this book. This was a phenomenal collection that you did, Jed. Look, I love take aim at digital learning, but the innovation, right? And authors know about this. The innovation that you incorporated with impact to influence was just phenomenal. I mean, the variety, the diversity of individuals, their expertise. It was just incredible how you were able to put that together. Again, at a high level, what is that book about?
Sure. Well, like you said, my job was to put it together. My job wasn't to tell their stories, but I wanted to hear their stories. And these really interesting people, like I said, it's very selfish for me, but people who I'd met along the way, who I really found and I drew inspiration from, but also knew that other people could learn from them. And it was an interesting challenge to find all these different lanes, but it was important to me to show how many different ways you can become Cambridge City Councilor, you can become a publisher, you can become a Teacher of the Year, you can stay in the classroom. And I mean, there's a National Teacher of the Year, and there's Sydney Chafee, who is still teaching. And there's Kristen Rhodes Beelan, who just testified in Washington, and she's still teaching. And what we're doing is paying attention to the important things that are happening right now in classrooms. So 3 years ago, I became a Teach Plus Massachusetts Policy Fellow. That was illuminating to find out really how policy works, because classroom teachers we're not taught that. We don't kind of need to know it, but to learn how, whether it's funding or policy, what happens at the state level, local level, and then at the national level, that was illuminating. But the people I met through there were just amazing. And what I really wanted to do was have them tell their stories. And part of the idea of recording them all, I really liked that I didn't do it high tech. I mean, I just pressed record on the Zoom, and that's what you'll get to in the book. It'll push you through my site to get there, but they're really just recordings, because I didn't want to take away. I didn't want to tell people stories. I wanted to ask the questions, like I said earlier, that really got to the heart of what makes them. And most people are too polite to call themselves a change maker, probably yourself included. But that's why they're in the book. Yeah. They know they're risk takers. They may say that they're rule breakers, but there's a pride in saying that. And then it's my job to say, well, you are a change maker. And that's why you're in that book. That's why you wrote your book. By the way, I was really honored to be one of the early readers and reviewers for your book, because it's a powerhouse. I know I use that word, and I stand by it. Chris Jones, Dr. Chris Jones, who's a principal here in Massachusetts, his podcast was the first I was ever a guest on. And I was like, this is great. You get to sit and talk to someone for 30, 40 minutes or an hour about yourself. Who doesn't like that, of course? But it was like, oh, you really, when you sit and you have those conversations, and it's the same conversations we have in school, sometimes passing in the halls, but when you can really talk about it and then follow up on questions, that was like that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't want to do a podcast, like I said, but I wanted to capture those in the book. So finding people who understand student agency, understand teacher agency, understand what empowerment really looks like, but also understand the struggle of the pull between those steps in our careers. And you've taken those steps, and you've taken those steps in and out of leadership. And now you're getting to talk about your book all over the place. I'm so jealous. I couldn't believe when I saw your poster in Times Square. That was really, congratulations to you. But
Jed, no, man, I tell you, every time we get together, you make me cry, laugh. And I tell you, this book right here, Impact to Influence, just aesthetically put together. Just it seems like it was just seamlessly tied in. Whereas building that level, what I call constructionism, right? Where each story was just building off of one another. I appreciate it that, that you're calling me a change maker. You're right. It's hard to individually call yourself a change maker, but in order to take, I like to say, intentional risk, right? There's that, risk management component of it. You always weigh, the going to the positive or the negative side of, the pros and cons when you're thinking about these adoptions or big grandiose ideas for change, but we have to do it now, right?
we have to do it now, right? Yeah. I found this quote, and it's such a good one as to the why. Roberto Rodriguez, so the Assistant Secretary of Planning, Evaluation, Policy Development. This is so perfect. He says, access to educational technology is not a nice to have for some students in some classes, for some teachers who might think it's important. It's critical for student participation. Critical.
Right.
Innovation economy to fully participate in our democracy and to engage in a global society. I mean, it is critical. We are so far past the point of those teachers who are just opting out or choosing not to. And part of my job is to give that guilt trip to teachers too, is to say, when your kids get to the next year's classes, everyone knows that when they came from your room, everyone knows who came from which rooms because of the skills they're bringing with them. And I think it's, George Carl said it too. It's never hold students back based on what you don't know. And we're past the point of, that self-learning is really a priority, and it's critical.
Absolutely.
But it's a really different model, right? We are not the experts in the classroom. And that's nothing shows that more than AI and machine learning and ChatGPT, where we've just really had to rethink what is the teacher's role in the classroom. But that goes for a second grade teacher just as easily, who is doing an hour of code and bails on it because in 10 minutes they can't help the students. They can't answer the questions that the kids have. Absolutely. There are teachers who are just so uncomfortable saying, I don't know the answer. So then they'll bail, or they won't do it. Or if they do, it might just be that 1 hour of code for the year. And that's the stuff. Those are the habits I want to break. That's why I don't do hour of code, week of code, because in so many cases it becomes a week of code. And then what happens the rest of the year? And we get locked into that thinking of technology is going to be just coding, just robots. And don't get me wrong, I love coding and robots. That's my passion area. Computational thinking, different from coding. But that sort of thinking and that sort of elevation, what it brings me to is this idea of how do we lift digital literacy? And that's a project I'm really focusing on. And what I say is the lifting of digital literacy happens across 5 domains. Because if you're a principal and your district is like, all right, we have funding, or this year our strategic plan, we're going to improve technology. It's just too big, and it's too vague, and it's too unfocused. So I would say within those 5 domains, so that's instructional, operational, computational, creativity, and wellness. Everything we're talking about with learning, with technology and digital literacy specifically, for me, falls within those 5 domains. And I say wellness different from digital citizenship, because digital citizenship for so long has really been about protecting your laptop and hiding your passwords. And it's not dealing with the reality of, or it's not helping parents answer the question, what age should I get a cell phone? And well, you gave us this Chromebook, so it's your problem that my kid's on YouTube at 10:30 at night, or they're not unplugging at midnight and they're not sleeping. So the wellness piece is that the cognitive, the social emotional, the behavioral impact, that's the part that we need to think about as wellness. And what's interesting, when it's digital citizenship, everyone wonders who else is teaching it, who's deploying the common sense lessons, who's teaching that content. When it's wellness, everyone's invested. Parents, teachers, counselors, admin, everyone, it's obvious. And again, it's a little bit of that guilt trip. But going back to those 5 domains, it's too big to do all 5. So let's look at the instructional. Let's look at the operational. And then I think it's a good practice for a teacher to pick it up and say, which of these is my wheelhouse? Which of these is my blind spot? I think it's good for an administrator to say, in our building, creativity, that's our blind spot. We've got the operation, we've got the infrastructure, we've got, the pedagogy is there, but our kids aren't generating unique content. We're still, we're not doing cardboard trifolds anymore, but everyone's making the same Google slides. Well, guess what? You're still doing the trifold. You're just doing it, on Google Slides. So how can we think about empowering students to use that? Because you're not capturing voice that way. Yeah. And that's the answer of the voice and choice, is how are we empowering students to publish differently, students to be engaged with school content differently, and our role as teachers, educators, leaders is how are we sharing those voices? How are we shining those voices? Is it through blogs and podcasts? Is it video? And I love Google Slides, don't get me wrong. But if someone's just transferring the project they've done for 20 years into a slide, that's only a starting point. Yeah. Good starting point, but it's only a starting point until you're leveraging the audio, the video, or the creativity. And really then scratch the surface of, well, where's that content coming from? Is it totally student generated? Then we can start to think about some of the AI impact.
Oh, Jed, wonderfully stated, right? Also how you highlighted wellness. It's so critical, right? The 5 domains to my audience that are listening out there, so critical and foundational. But really, I loved how, Jed, you unwrapped the domain of wellness, which is so important now in the education space, and how you're able to tie that wellness into this digital literacy aspect of it, great interface of it cognitively, looking at it from a social emotional dynamic, empowerment, all critical. But I think, Jed, and this is a sub question, right? We're at this, I like to say, precipice point where we have these leveled, superficial conversations around the 5 domains. Mm-hmm. Right? And I'm not saying any of them are of importance with one another, but they're all important. But, like you said, we might be great in a hypothetical situation. We might be great in the operational and the pedagogical sense, right? Infrastructure could be there. Computational is there. Wellness is something that we need to work on. And usually in education, I kind of see this as, and again, this is not quantified, but just more from this anecdotal standpoint, is that if we're not strong in an area, or if it's an area that we need development or continuous growth, we kind of just leave it alone, right?
Right.
How do we now, within those 5 domains, Jed, strategically address it, even if, let's hypothetically say that we're great in the operational sense, but from the pedagogical sense, we're not there yet? How are we able to address those 5 domains with the same intensity and vitality, so that we're really meeting the grounded means or the grounded modes of learning for all?
Well, part of my role, and I think part of my excitement to move to an admin point of view, is to point out the ways I've seen it done. I wouldn't say poorly, but I've seen it done to me, to other staff, and I've seen it done ineffectively, I'd say, which is going out and hiring outside PD to come and tell your district where you're weak. If your district knows it's weak, they need to find, I think, those pockets within who are doing it well and shine on those leaders. And just like the Impact Influence Project, you have the strong instructional leaders. You have the folks who are experts in wellness, and that's one of the through lines in that book was leaders tapped those individuals who had that special something, whether it was something with their students, something with their structures, or something with their systems. But they tapped to them and said, would you share this? And it doesn't mean you have to leave your classroom. It could be, would you just share this at a staff meeting? And it's probably not the operational, the instructional piece. It's more the ambiguous piece. It's more the competency-based stuff. And that's the stuff that's hard because it's not going to show up on standardized tests. But I think what districts need to do is, A, support their teachers better, because we're still, it's that recovery piece. No one's giving enough time and attention to it. But nothing will help that teacher reclaim that agency and really reclaim their classroom more than being validated for the expertise they bring. And then saying, would you share that with your team, with your grade level, with your school, with the district? Come speak at a state conference. Come to MassQ here in Massachusetts, or just come to a local conference. Share that expertise. Or have them partner. If you've got the money and you want to bring your vendor in, great. But don't give that superficial address to the whole staff without partnering up the teachers who are going to also be able to deliver and help move those levers once that expert leaves the building. Right? An expert can come and really motivate your staff and bring them to tears. But when they leave, are you poised to then pick up that work? So I think finding the leaders within the district, and the leaders don't have to be the ones with the fancy desks. The leaders can be the ones who are in the classrooms. The leaders can be the ones, and we know who they are. And I think inviting them, giving that validation, I think that's all critical.
Absolutely, Jed, perfectly stated. Just like how a practitioner would put it, just like how I would put it as well, the pockets of excellence do exist, right? They exist in all of our districts, even our leaders. I consider everybody a leader in their own right, because they're bringing their individual value to make this a shared collective value, so that now we could continue this trajectory and pathology of all. But I want to ask you this question, Jed. And innovation and creativity, right? I'm going to focus on that. Innovation and creativity are considered meta-ruptors in the AC stage of education. I know my vocabulary with meta-ruptors. It's a new
eyebrow. My eyebrow lifted off my forehead on that.
It's a meta-ruptor, right? Better than punctuated equilibrium. But anyway, that's another one. But, innovation and creativity are considered meta-ruptors in the AC stage of education, right? So in the space that we're in now, the VUCA world, a book that I'm reading, Roger Spitz and Linda Zewin, they exploited VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, where now they're saying unvice, uncertain, volatile. There's that level of intersectionality, complexity, and exponential. Now, in this new demand of the AC stage of education, right? Based on, the work that you've been doing, and now the work that you're going to be leading as, the director of digital learning and innovation, how should leaders and change agents and classroom practitioners create this interpersonal dynamic of disruption with intersectionality and exponentially, right? With now these traditional principles of VUCA. Because when we see VUCA, we didn't hear of this intersectionality and the exponential rates of the acceleration of this level of disruption because of the rapidity of technology, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, right? So just for my audience, in this limited, jargon-laden, simplistic form of what does intersectionality and exponential threads of disruption, what does that mean in the AC stage of education?
I almost get the sense you're asking me because you can't put your finger on it either. And it's because it's so hard, but that's what makes it powerful, is that it has to be, I think, tailored, and it helps districts and leaders tailor it to their circumstance, right? And I think going back to your previous question too about what leaders should do, I think they should name it.
Yes.
If one of those domains is their weak area, first of all, they should name it. They shouldn't leave it alone.
Yeah.
You should name it and then tap those leaders within. But part of naming it is when it floats to the surface. And yes, VUCA for me is VUCA helps name it because it brings it out, it shines a spotlight. And when you think about, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity, those are all pretty rotten words. I mean, when you think about it's all of the black cloud hanging over, and then you're really talking about all those impact, right?
Yeah.
And then what the intersectionality and then what the exponentiality, those to me are the gateways to rebuild,
Absolutely.
gateways to reclaim. And I don't see those in terms of just COVID. I see those in terms of gateways forward and ladders forward. Yeah. I think VUCA, whatever field it's in, is really based in limitations and boundaries. It identifies boundaries and it kind of shows you, okay, these are the obstacles, these are hurdles. And I think if you use it as a framework that way, it begins to lay the roadmap for whether it's strategic planning, whether it's setting your own personal professional goals. It helps bring some of the complexity and turn it actionable. And I think for me, it's the more you can get distracted, you can get misdirected by identifying too many roadblocks and too many obstacles. But the intersectionality, that's where you're going to be able to personalize it for your own district, more importantly, for your own students. And that's the personalization piece. For me, that intersectionality, that brings in culture, that brings in equity, that brings in bias, that brings in, and you better believe that, yeah, we can have technology automate those human tasks, but that's only as good as the person who's taking that data and making decisions with it. So you're not going to bake out the bias, and you're not going to bake out the equity-based or the inequities that might already be there latent, because we're still the human on the other end. So that intersectionality for me, it's all about relationships, connections. It's interesting. I just saw this morning, 25 years ago today was when the IMAX came out. The colorful ones, the candy color, blueberry, strawberry.
Yep.
Yeah, those were game changers. I was teaching third grade, and those were but the reason, and that was it was the punctuated equilibrium right there, because that was a moment. It was a moment in culture, and it was a moment in schools, because this product came along, and you didn't have to decide, I need this monitor, this keyboard, this body, this modem, this router. It was all in one. And that was the tagline. But it was about the relationship. It was the relationship with the human and the machine. And we're all suckers for Apple, because how many products do we have in our homes and our pockets, right? But there is something, and that should be a study of its own. But that relationship in connection to technology, that's why we're at now, exactly 25 years later, thinking about we can see what's coming out in the pipeline. We know the impact and the influence of machine learning and AI, and we know how transformational it will be. Not that it can be, because you can't be that teacher who just closes your doors and says, because kids are using it. Kids are the experts. So this is our next punctuation point, I think, where there is this transformational piece. Now, the intersectionality for me is the personalization, and that is the really key piece. I'm going to turn my page because I wrote my thoughts on this a couple hours ago, because that's a loaded question. If we're striving toward the inclusivity and the equity, right? Taking VUCA and then putting it through the intersectionality lens, I think helps answer those questions. But the exponentiality, that's the rapid growth, that's the insane spread. And you know what it is? It's the model of impact to influence. The intersectionality is the impact. How are we doing in the classroom right now, these kids that are in front of us? And then the exponentiality is, okay, 1 year from now, 5 years from now, Delta 2030, how are we bringing these changes that are happening now? What are the benefits we're going to reap? What's the damage we're going to cause? And if you're not prepared to answer both of those questions, then I think you're not doing students or our business the proper respect that deserves. So adapting to the current needs, and then staying ahead of the curve, at least modeling that lead learning and being a district that's forward thinking, forward facing, and not just throwing up more and more roadblocks, because you're going to be the ones picking up the pieces after.
Yeah, and Jed, wonderfully stated. I could tell you this because I love you to death. That sounded like an interview answer where I'm saying you're hired.
All right.
Because I mean, if you think about it, Jed, I took a course, right? And this was, I believe it was a 10-week, 12-week course that I took at MIT. And within the course, and I believe I was trying to recite off a rote memorization, Moore's Law, and how you contextualize Moore's Law, which is kind of mining the gap between humans and machines, right? And now we're at this point, I like to say our students, they walk in Blockbuster, for school, and then they come out and operationalize Netflix with a high degree of competency, right? So how we're truly mining that gap. And when we think about intersectionality, right? And when we think about, this exponential rate or exponentiality, what does that look like? Jed, you're right. Nano learning, micro learning, these are the things that are going to dominate education before Delta 2030 gets here. Jed, you and I, we're talking about ASI, artificial superintelligence. We're just at the education, talking about the entry point of artificial intelligence, when our economy and the demand of our economy is changing to ASI, where we're going to have essentially virtual twins that are going to emulate us by 85%. So now intersectionality and this exponential type of transformation needs to be undergirded when we look at AI, machine learning. We haven't even touched on that. We only touched upon that a little bit, right? And then we didn't even hit on this third one, and this is for another episode, neural networks, right? When we talk about that as well, that is going to be a huge factor in the education. But last question, Jed, you made it through, brother. You made it through. I know. Woo. I love you, brother. All right, now, Jed, and I don't know if I can hold you to this, right? Because you and I, we get together, it's 3 hours later, we're still talking about, we didn't get through one agenda item, we're still on this agenda item.
But giving me all these limits.
I'm going to, Jed, in 3 words, I knew I was going to get a reaction from you with this. Jed, in 3 words, right? What do you want our audience today to leave this episode with regarding AI leadership for Delta 2030? What 3 words will signify the necessary leadership signature to advance the transformative work in the AC stage of education?
All right, that's 2 questions, so I get 6 words. And one of them is going to be hyphenated. So I think some of the words, we can't think at 2030 yet. We got to, because you can't take the eyes off the prize that are the students in our classrooms right now.
Absolutely.
And we can't get so wrapped up in the potential down the road without figuring how that's going to impact our students right now who are already using these tools, good, bad, or whatever, right? That's the battle we're fighting in our classrooms. So my first word is capacity.
Absolutely.
And whether you're an instructional coach, whether you're a leader, whether you're a classroom teacher, we got to stick to the ABCs, always build capacity. And that's the key. So capacity there, competency is the other, and it's yes, competency-based tasks, performance tasks across every adult in the building, not just classroom teachers, art, PE, wellness, counselors, everyone. What are the performance tasks we're asking students to share? How are we showing those? So competency is the other one. That's why I love when I see portrait of a graduate work being done. But that can't just be a receipt at the end. This is a collection of everything you've done. Right. It's got to be, that should be your license moving forward. Third word I'm going to say is your favorite, punctuated equilibrium, because I don't even think it is hyphenated, but it's too good. It takes a whole spot. But we really are at a point, just like 25 years ago when the iMacs came and we all wanted them and didn't know why we wanted them. It took 25 years to be able to say why we wanted them. Maybe 25 years from now, we'll be able to look at this point and say, wow, look at what we didn't know, look at the tools we didn't use. And it's not going to be 25 years. It's going to be 5 years. Right. Just like right now, we look back 5 years and say, how the hell did we get through COVID? How did everyone buy into this? And we didn't do it well, right? We were not all in the same boat. We were all in the same storm with a lot of different boats based on different needs, interest, ability, funds, all of it. So that, I think, when I think about leadership, those are the words. When I think about advancing transformative work, advancing is word number one, because it's always moving forward. Advancing, doing the lifting. I think learning, always modeling learning, and that is a really different model for a classroom teacher who doesn't have to be the expert, but also the administrators in the building. And there have to be polite people and polite ways of telling some of these people to get over themselves and rebuild their learning and remap, with the process of leading a staff, because it's a different staff, it's a different business, it's a different job. And I always say I've never found a principal who's convinced me why on earth I'd ever want that job. And I know I wouldn't. But what I do know is that job is so hard and that burnout rate is so real that I feel for principals, because they can't get to do the job they want to do. And in so many cases, they can't get to do the job they thought it was or the job it used to be. So I think they need to distribute some of that leadership. In that book, Take Aim, there's a section called Drop the D. And this is kind of a cool hook. You would like it, because if you want to talk about distributed leadership, that's noun. Activate it. Just drop the D. Distribute the leadership. Right. If you want to talk about differentiated learning, drop the D. Do it. Actually differentiate the learning. And that's the thing. It's like it has to become actionable. And whether it's AI work, we can't just keep reading about it and philosophizing about it. We've got to make it actionable. And then the third word is always going to be agency. And it's student agency, it's teacher agency, and it's leadership too. And that's the part that, for me, has always been behind the curtain. And I'm just beginning to peek in. And it's reassuring when admin teams have been classroom teachers, have been, and I don't want to say in the trenches, but you know exactly what I mean, because you can have the same conversations we're having, and you can keep the important work about the important work. And it can't be about, the individual advancement, and it can't just be about appeasing the parent population or getting the strategic goals in on time, because then you're taking your eyes off those students in the building, and before you know it, they're going to come and go. And if you're lucky, they'll get their portrait of a graduate, but back down to your 5-year-old, right? When he was in kindergarten, and now he's probably in second, third grade. If he's lucky, his work is making it home in the backpack. If he's luckier, it makes it to the fridge. If he's luckiest, you can get it on your phone. You can hear his voice on Seaside. You can listen to a podcast. You can hear his involvement in the classroom, and you have a connection to the classroom where you get to see photos, videos. You get to see the contextual learning going on in ways that we've never had the tools to be able to do before. That's the work that I love. And that's what gets me super excited, is bringing that work into schools and classrooms. It doesn't have to be technology. It doesn't have to be robots and AI, but they can help make it happen faster and better.
I'll tell you, Jed, Nashoba Regional School District is lucky to have you. And, you are going to undoubtedly help Nashoba reach that level of where we want to go in the AC stage of education, right? Capacity, competency, punctuated equilibrium. Got to have a discussion.
I learned it from you. I learned it by watching you.
we got to have a discussion on that again. But advancing learning and agency from the teacher and student standpoint, boy, I tell you, and I'm going to say it again, your district is lucky to have you. Jed, thank you for being on VFE Voices for Excellence, good brother. Now, just for my audience, right, today, obviously there's going to be a ton, right, because, we're getting a lot of questions regarding AI, regarding technology, regarding defining what innovation is, innovation in lieu of replication, right? That's another, misnomer of innovation that we're seeing. How would my audience be able to get in touch with you?
Sure. I do have a website, jedpd.com, like jedprofessionaldevelopment.com. I'd love to talk to you, your school, your district, your teams, anyone, just about doing some of this work. Like I said, making it actionable. Everything from, which robots you want to bring in your classroom to really more philosophical, where do we get started and how do we build roadmaps? You can find me on Twitter at Stefanowicz135. You find me there. You can find, those are the easiest ways to find me. All the links are there. My email's there as well. And either of those books you can find on Amazon. If you just search the titles, Take Aim at Digital Learning or Impact to Influence with my name, Stefanowicz, I think they'll get you there. And I'm really proud of you and your work. And it's important to me to tell you that because when we met, we didn't know each other. And within 5 minutes, we're like, this is a cool customer. And look at, you've got this book, and you've got this podcast, and but more importantly, you've got this mission. And your mission is about also elevating and lifting voices of individuals like myself. And I'm happy to have returned the favor. But it's a really cool journey. And I can't wait to see where you're going. And when I see the districts that are lucky enough to bring you in to do some of this heavy lifting, and it is heavy lifting, bring you in to ask some of those hard questions with a smile on your face, because that's disarming. That's a good trick. But you know what? That's our job sometimes as outsiders. And it's easier for me, like in my new job, to come in as an outsider and just ask those why questions. So that's the work I love to do. And that's the work I've been able to do this is year 29 in our field. And I hope to keep doing it for the next 29. But I really appreciate this. Is a great conversation. I know we could talk for 3 more hours.
We could talk for 3 hours. Listen, Jed, you make sure you call me. I'm coming to see you. Either way, we got to connect. And we got to do it early, because if we start at 2, we can end at 10.
All right, done.
Oh, man, Jed, thank you for coming on to my audience. Thank you for tuning in. And on that note, onward and upward, everybody. Have a great evening.